Hi, everybody. In this series, we're going to be looking at how we're going to texture stone on our model. The main thing about stone is that it's going to have some complex elements to it, and we want to be able to do this manually without having to use provided smart materials, basing this off of reference and figuring out how to make this in the most believable way possible. So, let's get started. The thing that I think we should do first is look at reference. How does reference help us figure out how to make the right kind of stone? Well, the main thing is you want to look up the kinds of stones that you want this thing to look like. So for example, I find this piece to be a really compelling piece of reference for what it is that I want to create. It has all the general kind of looks that I'm actually wanting here. It's got some dirt buildup. It has got a little bit of decay to it, but it's not too old. And it looks relatively believable. Some nice buildup of dirt, some nice contrasting shapes. So for example, you can see how this element separates from this cavity here because of that buildup of dirt. It's got some relatively interesting little bits of dirt built up in here, and it looks pretty convincing and is relatively simple, which is what I want in this case. So that's really, really useful, but it's also good to find other pieces of reference to work with as well. So for example, I wanted to find other pieces of stone that were interesting. So for example, I really like the sort of worn down edges that exist on this piece of stone for texture purposes. I find that that's really interesting. I think there's some interesting kind of color variation in here that I think is worth keeping as well. Probably a bit noisier than we actually want to go with in the end, but also worth looking at. Also, we can start looking at pieces like this, which comes from textures.com. And one of the things I really like about it is the fact that it's got some kind of pock marks in it, these little sort of indentations. I think those are really interesting. And we've already kind of sculpted in a lot of these cracks and crevices, which is very reminiscent of what we're already working with. Some of the small scale detail in here is really nice, as well as sort of these sort of general color variations that exist in here. All of that looks really, really good. As well, for pieces like this, where we've got some sort of brighter spots showing up and a lot of that small scale pock marking and some striations, all that looks really good. Now, I do want to point out both of these pieces are actually concrete. They're not stone. And that can be okay. We can always change things up and potentially go with a stone that doesn't exist. This is a fictional element. So if the design kind of trumps what the actual functional reality of it would be, that's okay. As long as it looks believable, which in this case, this already kind of looks like what we want. Again, if it's just not stone, but is technically concrete, as long as we kind of find some intermediary where a person's not going to necessarily go, oh, hey, that's concrete, that's not stone. As long as we don't trick the viewer or suddenly take them out of the immersion of the process, then we'll be just fine. But again, I like a lot of these small details in here. These dark crevices are all really, really good to look at. I recommend whenever you're going through any of these kind of pieces, really make sure you look up close and start to try to figure out what's working and what's not working on any of these given pieces. Because the fact of the matter is, that is what's going to tell you what you need to know. So for example, in here, a lot of our pock marks, they're all really dark on the inside. There's some bright spots, but in general, they are darker than the outside areas. There's some bright spots that exist here to give some color variation. But you want to make sure that you pick this apart. Try to figure out what's actually going on here, the kind of shapes that you're seeing, because they'll tell you whether or not you're working in the right direction with your piece. So as you start to create some variation, you'll start to figure out if this looks the way it's supposed to look. The reason I point this out is because it's easy to get caught up in Substance Painter and start to work on things a little bit inappropriately. Start to just work with the tools that exist and not necessarily create what is supposed to exist. So the thing is, you don't want to get lost in the tool and forget what you're actually trying to create. So you look through these pieces first, figure out what you want to accomplish, and work towards that with the tools that are present. So in our next video, we're going to start actually diving into Substance Painter itself and start to accomplish these various appearances.